David Smith here with another Flipped Classroom math video. A few tips before we get started. Remember, you can always pause the video if you need to catch up with your notes. You can also speed up or slow down the playback if that helps. Finally, you can turn on the captions so you can see my words going by at the bottom of your screen. Today's topic, simplest radical form. So these are rules and instructions for reducing whatever you find under the root sign into its simplest form. So from here on out, the expectation is that when you work problems and you have roots, you're going to put them in simplest form. This is a pretty important concept. So I've sketched out the overall picture here, which I'll explain, and then we'll do a bunch of examples. Root 8. This can be simplified. The first step is you want to factor 8 into numbers with perfect squares. You're looking for perfect squares. Why do you think we want perfect squares? It's because perfect squares, like 64, have a nice integer square root, and we're going to exploit that. Okay, so if I factor 8 into numbers with perfect squares, I'm going to factor it as 2 times 4, because 4 is a perfect square. Now, step 2, I can remove the perfect square by taking its square root. So the square root of 4 is 2. That comes out of the root sign and leaves the 2 in there. So what happened was this 4 came out and went to the front, right there, and we left the 2 in there. 2 is not a perfect square, doesn't have an integer square root. So non-perfect squares stay inside the root sign. Let's do some examples. Okay, you could pause the video at any point along the way and try to work the problems before I do them, okay? In fact, you could pause them all right now. If you think you know how to do this, just try all 4 of these, see what you get. Okay, 60. How could I factor 60 to show some perfect squares? Well, it's an even number. I could divide by 2 and see what that would look like. 2 times 30 is 60, but neither 2 or 30 are perfect squares. So let's try another one. Maybe 4. 4 times 15. Hey, 4 is a perfect square. 4 times 15. That works. 4 comes out as its square root and goes in front. So that becomes 2 root 15. Now when you do a problem like this, you should always take a look at the number that's left and see if you can do that again. 15 is not a perfect square, and I can't factor it into perfect squares. It's 3 times 5, but neither of those are perfect squares, so we are done with that one. Let's take a look at 125. Think of a way to factor that number that shows some perfect squares. If you came up with 5 times 25, you did a good job. 5 times 25. That makes 125, and guess what? 25 is a perfect square. It comes out as its square root, so this is going to be 5 times root 5. Okay, let's try another one. We're getting a little bigger here. 300. Think for a minute, can you factor that into some numbers that have perfect squares? Well, let's try 4 times 75. Because 4 times 75 does make 300. 4 is a perfect square, so it comes out. So we're going to take it out as its square root. Square root of 4 is 2. 2 times root 75. Now remember when we did this one, I said look at that number and see if you could do it again. 75. You can do that one more time. What are 2 factors of 75, one of which is a perfect square? If you came up with 3 times 25, you did a good job. Because 3 times 25 is indeed 75, and 25 is a perfect square. Notice how this 2 just stayed here. It's along for the ride. We can't get rid of it. So now we're going to take out the 5, that's the square root of 25. It's going to come out and go in front. Now here's the trick. When it comes in front, it's multiplied by the number that's already there. So I'm taking out the square root of 25, that's 5. Multiply it by 2, that makes 10. So this one's going to be 10 root 3. So this problem, a little bit more complicated. Let's try 175. What does that do? How can you factor that? Well, 175 is some multiple of 25. How many 25s go in there? 7. So this is 7 times 25. Now this one, we have 25 again. We know, like that 25, the square root is 5. So that comes out as 5 root 7. Okay, root 3,000. Now don't get scared that this is a big number. Some of these actually come out fairly simple. If you want to pause the video, you can try it. Let's see how that works. So I'm looking for perfect square factors that are in 3,000. And if you think about it, 30 times 100 makes 3,000. 100 is a perfect square. It comes out as its square root, which is 10 root 30. Now let's take a look at that 30. Can you factor that down into numbers that include perfect squares? And if you think about it, there's quite a few ways to multiply to 30. 3 times 10, 2 times 15, 6 times 5. But none of those include perfect squares, so we're done with that one. Now this one, this is a little bit more challenging of a number. It's hard to come up with factors in your head of 432. I want to show you another way to do this one. What if we take 432, it's even, so I can just divide it by 2. So there's a factor. What does that leave? That leaves 216. Now, again, even, so I can factor 2 out. What is half of 216? That's 108. Can I do that again? Sure. 2 times what makes 108? That's 54. Can we keep going? Sure. 2 times 27 makes 108. Now, I got an odd number. Can't do that anymore. But 27, let's go 1 up. Let's see if we can divide that by 3. Sure enough, I can. That's 3 times 9. And then 9 also divides by 3. So that's 3 times 3. So now, with this little chain, I know I can multiply to 432 by going 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 3 times 3 times 3. So let's write that out. This would be root 2 to the 1, 2, 3, 4th power times 3 to the 3rd power. That's going to help us. This becomes 2 squared times 2 squared times 3 squared times 3. Now think, why am I grouping it by squareds? Well, the square root is the opposite of squared. So 2 squared comes out as its 2. So I'm going to have a 2 come out for that. I'm going to have another 2 come out for that. I'm going to have a 3 come out for that. And then I have my last 3. Another way to think of this is this would be 4 times 4 times 9 times 3. So 2 squared is 4. Square root is 2. That's my first 2. Square root of that one makes my second 2. Square root of 9 is my 3. And then I have this leftover 3. It's just going to stay under the root sign. Now I can finish. 2 times 2 is 4. Times 3 is 12. So this one becomes 12 root 3. Now that you've watched the video, take a moment and write down any questions that you might have so you can bring them to our next class. Remember that you can always watch the video again and perfect your notes. Finally, if you enjoyed the video, please click the like button down below. And if you'd like to help me grow my YouTube channel, please click subscribe.